Howdy, folks, and welcome back to the Corrupt Clearfield podcast. I am your host, Gabriel Harber, and remember, before we get started, as always, you can check out all the documents I'm going to be referencing on this episode by clicking the Dropbox folder link in the description below, wherever you happen to be listening to this podcast at. So, as I promised last episode, we are going to talk all about what has gone on in the last 18 months, or thereabout, since I released the Corrupt Clearfield podcast series back in November of 2016. John was released from jail early, actually, shortly after I released the podcast series. Not claiming that it had anything to do with it, maybe it did, maybe it didn't. Definitely the timelines line up to where if it did have something to do with it, that is when it would have had to happen. And though the PFA was still valid to that day and is still valid to this day, Terra has not attempted any further action against John. The PFA expires later this year on 9/29/2018. I view this as a success long-term in terms of the work that I did on the Corrupt Clearfield podcast, or at least the first 15 episodes, because there was absolutely no way John was going to keep himself out of jail at that point. Every new PFA violation would constitute an additional 6 months in jail, and I have a sneaking suspicion that for some reason or another, the goal was to see him basically spend the rest of his life in and out of jail, rotting away in prison. So though he was released from jail, he wasn't in the clear yet though. His Social Security income was stopped during the time while he was in jail. His family had been paying for his bills while he was incarcerated, but not only was his SSI stopped, he was being sent bills to pay back the overpayments that had been made while he was incarcerated. So he was incarcerated in July of 2016, and he still received his Social Security payments for a couple months after being incarcerated. But then once the Social Security office got wind of the fact that he was incarcerated, they said, hey, those 2 payments we just made to you weren't valid, so not only are you not getting any future payments, you also owe us for the 2 payments we made in the 2 months while you were incarcerated. Now, this was the first oddity that occurred after John was released from jail. Shortly afterwards, he received, without warning I might add, a check for the full amount of Social Security benefits he had failed to receive while in jail, and the overpayment billing completely stopped. They no longer ask for that. $6,174 total. So I only read the amount to say that this was no small chunk of change. This was the government forking over a sizable amount of cash and forgiving a debt that was a little over $2,000. I went with John to the Social Security office to determine why his benefits had been reinstated so suddenly. I spoke to a few representatives. They were at a loss. They couldn't figure it out. I finally was able to speak with some higher-ups, some supervisors in the department, and they determined that because PFA violations skirt the line between civil and criminal, something we've discussed in the early parts of the podcast series, John's benefits had been mistakenly discontinued as the prison warden had reported that John was incarcerated for a criminal offense when in fact it was a civil offense. The representative further clarified the matter by explaining the prison warden himself was the one that contacted the SSA office and corrected the mistake, which changed the classification of John's conviction from criminal to civil. Moving on to the next item of note, I was banned from visiting the Clearfield County Courthouse without a sheriff's deputy escorting me. During the first time I found this out, Deputy Chief Mike Cherner was the officer who escorted me, and I asked him why it was I was receiving such an honor. He claimed that he had seen all my posts on social media and on the Corrupt Clearfield podcast series, and he determined I was a security threat. Go figure. He was also recently elected sheriff of Clearfield County, so I'm sure there's no collusion, pay-to-play, corruption at all going on in this county. It turns out Judge Ammerman had ordered it as far as me having to require a sheriff's deputy to escort me through the courthouse after he listened to the podcast and saw my social media posts promoting the podcasts. So, appreciate it, Ammerman. I have a fan. As if that couldn't be more hilarious, my Facebook profile picture, which is me with sunglasses on, a hoodie, and my big old beard out in the sun, that profile picture was printed off and hanging behind the security desk at the entrance to the courthouse. Out of amusement, I actually sent Fred, that being Fred Ammerman, a letter with a better picture of myself for him to hang up behind the security desk. I figured maybe they would want to see my eyes so they could better identify me, wouldn't try to sneak in. I also contacted the FBI field office in Pittsburgh and the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office shortly after releasing the podcast series. The Pennsylvania Attorney General's office sent me a letter saying that they were not allowed to view the contents of my website on state computers as it could contain harmful or malicious content. They said that I could write, and they gave me a one-page document. They said I could write out exactly what it was that I thought had gone on, and if I needed to, in an act of supreme courtesy, they mentioned I could use the back of that piece of paper to write on if I needed more space. Yeah, worthless bureaucracies. The FBI did contact me back though, which I was initially extremely encouraged by. I was actually in Clearfield still, but the Columbus that being where I'm from, Columbus, Ohio, FBI field office contacted me and asked if we could meet up as soon as I was back in town. I said sure. I met them at Tim Hortons in downtown Columbus, and it turns out they were from the counterterrorism unit and had received anonymous tips that I was a potential ISIS militant attempting to recruit from within the United States. Let me repeat that sentence because I'm not pulling your leg. They were from the counterterrorism unit and had received anonymous tips that I was a potential ISIS militant attempting to recruit from within the United States. And in fact, they had no knowledge of anything that happened in Clearfield. Now, just let me point out one thing that makes no sense here, and I've thought about quite often. If they were from the counterterrorism unit and they were investigating a credible threat, which I hope would constitute them actually taking the time to contact me and meet with me and spend a couple hours with me, if they were investigating a credible threat, wouldn't they know what that credible threat had been up to, especially if that credible threat had been bumping heads with government officials in a different part of the country over the past 6 months? So I found it astounding that they had absolutely no idea about Clearfield, the Corrupt Clearfield podcast, or any of those matters. Whether or not that is actually the case, that is what I was told, and they wanted to know what I had been doing out there, what had been going on, so I gave them the Cliff Notes and then gave them a flyer to lead them to corruptclearfield.com, told them if they were interested, they could listen to the podcast themselves. I did request and finally received the FOIPA documents, that's Freedom of Information and Privacy Act, from the encounter with the FBI. They have to give it to you. It was on a CD, it included the report, and it had 2 redacted pages in it that basically are all the good information that I was not able to receive, like who actually filed the complaint against me, what did they say I was doing, et cetera, what kind of investigation did the officers do outside of contacting me. They pretty much just gave me the notes of my own voice, or my own speaking to them from the interview and telling them what it was I had been up to and what was going on. You can view that document if you would like in the Dropbox folder. After being investigated for potential terrorism, though, who knows what watch list or cannot buy list or cannot fly list that I'm on at this point. It's impossible to find out. Liberty. Also after John's release, a few of my family and friends in Clearfield had notified me that Tara had begun posting erratically about myself and my family on Facebook. I figured something like this would eventually happen after she learned about and listened to the podcasts, so I wasn't too surprised. So, I decided I would file a PFA against her. You can check out the complete annotated fact pattern that I created and presented a copy of to both Tara and to Judge Cherry in my PFA hearings. I was actually able to get a temporary PFA against her, so until we actually had our court date, she had a PFA on her from me to her, and this meant there would be a civil hearing in front of a hearing officer. Now, Warren Mikesell, if you'll remember that name from the earlier episodes, was assigned to preside over the PFA hearing, and at the onset of the hearing, he mentioned that he knew the defendant, but he would still be capable of judging the matter fairly. I asked him to recuse himself, much to his dismay. The new hearing officer was Donald Giboney. He heard the entire case, and rather than issue a ruling on the matter, I presented far more than is necessary for a preponderance of evidence. He ruled that Tara and I were not closely linked enough for a PFA to be valid, given that she was now divorced from my grandfather-in-law. I was curious, why not issue this ruling from the beginning? None of the evidence that I actually presented in that courtroom while the hearing was taking place was evidence that had anything to do with how closely related Tara and I actually were. So that could have been a ruling that was made at the onset without actually wasting 3 hours of my time, his time, and Tara's time. And, of course, everybody else that was required to attend. It was also the incorrect ruling, though, per the legal definition of the word affinity. The word affinity states, in law and cultural anthropology, affinity, as distinguished from consanguinity, blood relationship, is the kinship relationship that is created or exists between 2 or more people as a result of someone's marriage. It is the relationship which each party to a marriage has to the relations of the other partner to the marriage, but does not cover the marital relationship of the parties to the marriage themselves. Though laws vary considerably, affinity does not always cease with the death of one of the marriage partners through whom affinity is traced, nor with the divorce of the marriage partners. In addition to kinship by marriage, affinity can sometimes also include kinship by adoption and step relationship. Though this was a coward's cop-out in my opinion, by not actually making a ruling on the information provided and finding a legal loophole that wasn't even really a loophole to work around, it created a valuable precedent. If I was not able to seek a PFA against Tara because we were not closely related any longer, then she could not seek out the same against me either. Before we exit out of this episode, I'm going to read you a few of those selected excerpts from this annotated fact pattern that I presented to the courts. Tara states in a long, rambling Facebook post, on December 28th, 2016. The only solution is to make this stop for good. Long story short, I hope certain individuals enjoyed their Christmas holiday because your choices are now going to determine where you spend all future holidays. This is in no way, shape, or form intended to be a threat of any nature. It is fact. Others are making these choices of their own accord. No one makes us make any decision. We make our own. Not ruling out any type of duress, of course. So, while some choose to continue playing games, I am praying that I and other entities are able to end this crap once and for all. Anyone ever hear of the crouching lion? Well, it does pay to have patience in more ways than one. Then on January 2nd, 2017, inside of one of her posts, she says, "These persons will by their own choosing come to know the demise they are trying to place upon myself, my family, and my friends." A little bit cryptic, wouldn't you say? On January 3rd, 2017, the next day, Tara posts, "It's a federal offense to commit such acts, let alone against a former federal contract employee with high-level security clearances." She says, "This is extremely upsetting to me for many reasons, and now you have placed everyone in danger by your actions. This is a different world we live in these days. For as smart as some believe themselves to be, none of us knows everything all the time. There are reasons concerning national security as to why I am not allowed to go into details about my career field. Everyone that has left their digital footprint in support of your efforts has had their data gathered. You have enticed people with false information, effectively making them your unknowing accessories. The more you disseminate false information, gain more supporters, the higher severity of illegality on your part. That's on you. Your young age, a lack of experience and maturity could come at a high cost, loss of life. No, I am certainly not threatening anyone, nor would I ever. The consequences of your choices' behaviors are long-ranging, obviously more than you realize, and that is why people like you don't nor should ever be trusted with human lives because you are clearly short-sighted." Now, a little bit later on that day, the 3rd of January, she says, "Unexpectedly had to get my picture taken today for a permit." And then, roughly a week and a half later, she posts, well, what someone in her comments section describes as a picture of a hand cannon. Just a handgun with a massive caliber of bullet inside. One of her friends asks, "Is this the one you got?" Excellent choice. Tara says, "Not yet. However, after seeing it, I am pondering it." Someone else comments, "I wouldn't want to get shot with this little hand cannon." Tara says, "Exactly. I think that's why I posted it. The little hand cannon, as you call it, could come in quite handy, and no need to worry about hitting the mark, lol, haha." I wonder what that permit was for that she had went to get a few days back. All of this wasn't the end of it, though. It was, in fact, just getting started. Thanks for listening to the Corrupt Clearfield podcast. If you have information regarding the matters discussed during this podcast episode, or if you would like to share your story, please contact me at my new email address, crazygaby, that's G-A-B as in Bravo, E-Y, at protonmail.ch. Again, that's crazygaby at protonmail.ch. For updates as this investigation progresses, follow me on Twitter or Gab at crazygaby, or subscribe to my YouTube channel by typing crazygaby in the search bar. Lastly, please consider donating to the cause via PayPal or Bitcoin. The PayPal address is paypal.me/crazygaby, or you can visit corruptclearfield.com and click on the Support Us tab located on the left-hand side of the screen on desktop, or the drop-down menu on the mobile website. The PayPal link and Bitcoin addresses are both listed there.